Our next guest is best known for his sharply satirical, uncompromising cartoons that help us all cut to the meaning behind the spin. He has drawn for The Age for as long as any of us can remember. He has won all the big awards, and his work is represented in the National Gallery of Victoria, the NGV, all major libraries, and countless private collections. He is, of course, John Spooner. Good morning, John.
You're also a fine artist too, aren't you?
That's
Good
a matter
morning.
of opinion.
Is it?
How fine.
Was it the state of the law at the time, when you finished your degree, that led you to a career in political lampooning?
They happened at the same time. I was doing articles and then I was auditioning for a cartooning job in the lunch hour in that same year. So I had a friend who was starting in a Sunday paper called the Sunday Press, which was owned by The Age and the Herald and Weekly Times, oddly enough, to squeeze out Murdoch out of the Sunday market. And they were wanting a cartoonist. They didn't have one. And I think Tanberg and I both got a job with that paper that year. And I was doing my articles and trying to, audition, really. I had to do 4 cartoons in a week for John Stevens, the late John Stevens, the editor. And I got in that way. And then Graham Perkin then started using me as a caricaturist. He once showed one of my caricatures to Les Tanner and said, "Les, what do you think of this?" And Les said, "Not much." And Les became a great friend of mine over the years.
Can I take a guess, John, that you were in the back of that lecture hall just slowly sketching as you're meant to be listening about jurisprudence and all that?
I'd sometimes send up a brief to a barrister with a caricature on it. Things like that happen. You can't help yourself.
You'd have to have a certain amount of cynicism in you, wouldn't you, to become a political cartoonist?
No, you could express it another way. You could be very idealistic. You could be saying, unlike, say, a barrister, you get to choose your client. So I really believe in this, and this is my point of view, and I want to express it strongly. And then your conscience is your guide after that.
Sorry, I was going to ask, yes, a conscience, and also I just see that sort of gleeful look in your eye. You need an askance view of things, don't you?
Well, you've got to be, when people call other people sceptics, they're really complimenting them, because if you're not a sceptic as a journalist, let alone a cartoonist, then what are you? You're a propagandist. You should be always inquiring and thinking about what the received wisdom is versus what the facts seem to suggest. That old thing of, between a conspiracy and a cock-up, I'll go for a cock-up every day. Well, that might be true, but I think journalists should always be looking for a conspiracy, and if they find a cock-up, okay, fine, that's a good story. But you have to have a certain state of mind to think about how different forces in society can sometimes come together to represent vested interests. So looking in the economics argument, if someone's saying, well, we should have a certain type of reform to the banking system, you look at the person who's recommending it. Is he a banker? Does he have a vested interest in the outcome? Now, all good journalism takes that as a given. Cartoonists should too. So it's not necessarily cynicism, it's just realism married to journalism. It's journalism, really.
I would also suggest that it's very healthy to have a degree of doubt.
Yes.
And it's not a negative.
Too right. I mean, in this climate change thing, anyone who tells you they know is lying. In our book that we've just brought out, Taxing Air, one of the key points in it from Bob Carter is that there are about 40 disciplines that go to make up a climate science position. Nobody is an expert. As someone once said, a very famous meteorologist in America said, in climate science, we're all amateurs. There are very specialised pieces of expertise in one part, but they mightn't know anything about geology, or they may nothing about hydrology or astrophysics, and yet they're all relevant. They all come together, which makes it a fascinating story.
And one should doubt if people are filling in the gaps, eh?
Well, once again, you go back to vested interests. Are they making windmills? Do they represent mining companies? You always have to bear that in mind. It doesn't necessarily mean that vested interests dominate something, but they can certainly stimulate a discussion that favours their position.
So, John, That's what we were going to talk about next, that you've actually crossed over into that debate, and you and Bob Carter have put out a book called Taxing Air, which asks some very sound and reasonable questions about this whole issue of climate change.
Well, it's a very vexing problem. A lot of people think they've made up their mind about it. The issue involves some upsetting words like denier. Someone like me or Bob, or a lot of other scientists, are called deniers if they raise questions about the received wisdom in this issue. And when they do that, they're trying to make a link in people's minds subliminally to Holocaust deniers. The term denier gained a lot of common usage in debate about the Holocaust record. And so by using the term denier, they're being very clever. They're trying to,
tar you with the same brush.
Yeah, without having to do it specifically. Some of them have actually come out and explained exactly, oh yes, we understand the connection. Very, well-known public intellectuals have come out and said, yes, we understand the connection, and we're sticking to it. So, those sort of things got me really angry. And then I've met, over a period of time, a bunch of lovely scientists like Bob Carter and Bill Kinnenmoth. Bill Kinnenmoth used to be the head of the National Climate Centre for 12 years. In 1998, we had the hottest year on record for 150 years, and that was the El Nino year of 1998. Bill was the international coordinator for the World Meteorological Society's study of that event. He's not some guy just blew in out of...
Not some rat bag waving a red flag.
Yeah, and I love these blokes. I think they're terrific. I find them so stimulating and generous in their time. I'd ring them up and I'd always have chats. They put me onto the right things. And so one day we just thought, bugger this. I rang up Bob and I said, look, let's do a book that basically will give people like me, non-scientifically trained people, the opportunity to run through all the issues, to canvass a lot. So we've done 100 questions and answers. Now, we've thrown in a lot of scurrilous cartoons and drawings by me to just liven things up a bit. But basically, it will help people work their way through this issue.
Certainly with your political lampooning or caricatures and cartoons, the mode of illustration somehow or another cuts through all the bullshit. It shows a truth in amongst this obfuscation of stuff, media spin that goes on. And it's poetic sometimes. It is clear, decisive thought. And I guess in a way, being able to apply that in this book may be helpful on some of these issues. But, taking on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is not a small thing to be doing.
But it is a political body.
Yeah.
It's not a scientific body. It's a political body. It draws together the work of a large number of scientists.
Yeah.
But by the end process, the statements made by the IPCC are political. And the basic assumption of the IPCC at the beginning was not what's going on, but what can we do about man-made global warming. So it had an a priori assumption that humans are at fault. The great problem for the IPCC is that they made predictions. Now, they made predictions based on their climate computer models. They did this to persuade policymakers to do something. Now, as soon as they did that, they had to say, well, in the next 10 years, X is going to happen, or in the next 15 years, Y will happen. Well, unfortunately, they couched their predictions in terms of temperature. There will be warming. Now, between 1975 and 1995, the temperature rose by about 0.4 of a degree. In that period, CO2 rose dramatically, and they made a connection between the two. They were almost running lockstep. Since 1997, that warming rate stopped and went flat. So if you take the period 1945 to now, 70 years, in that period CO2 has kept rising all the time. But there's only one period between 75 and 95 or 97 where the temperature rose. It went down from 1945 to 1975. It was flat from 1997 to now. Now, that's a sort of worrying thing for the IPCC because they've got to account for it. They don't have an explanation. They say, well, it's natural variability. And then you say, well, it was natural variability to make it pause. Was it natural variability that made it warm? The problem is that their alarm is based on computer model projections about the future, of what will happen. And in this book, we'll give you a good account of another way of looking at all this, taking that pause in warming into account. People say, well, there's no pause. Okay, well, I say, why does the chairman of the IPCC himself, Mr. Pachauri, say it's true? I had in a cartoon 16 years as the pause, but he said, no, it's 17 years. Now, no one can argue with that. Question is, they say the warmth has gone into the ocean. Well, I've heard some brilliant scientists say, well, if it's gone into the ocean, what happened to the warmth that was falling on the land? Because the temperature readings weren't recording it as going up on the land. Did it only go up on the ocean and then get absorbed? It's a strange thing that's happening.
So do you surmise that the IPCC has a vested interest?
No. What I think is that there are a lot of really wonderful idealists who thought there was a real threat to mankind. And there were vested interests who thought they could also make money out of it. If you want to trade in carbon credits, you can be extremely rich. And if you want to make windmills like the Chinese do or General Electric do, you can make a lot of money. And you take those two forces. The people who are, for the very best of motives, want to believe that we have to save the planet now. And then you've got another group of people who say, yes, of course, they're right. Now, where can I put my windmill that needs a fully operational coal-fired power station running behind it to keep it going when the wind doesn't go?
See, I was going to say that, John, that you've got no problem with people asking these questions as they did some 30, even 40 years ago.
No.
But you've got a terrible problem with the dodgy science, the correlation, the match-up.
Well, it's not so much dodgy, it's just science. When you were using the word truth before, science evolves all the time. When people say, well, the science is settled, you know that's rubbish. Science is never settled. Science is an evolving thing. And when you have an area like this, which is the climate, goodness me, there are so many disciplines. It's interesting that there are people that find it really difficult to challenge an authority like the IPCC or the CSIRO or the Weather Bureau. But they have no problem challenging the Federal Reserve Bank in America over the way they ran the finance industry. They've got no problem with that. I mean, there were guys in America that had Nobel Prizes for saying, basically, there would never be a global financial crisis. And it happened.
So what is it? Is there a moral difference? Is that why?
No, I just think humans, I'm getting on, and the more I think about it, I think humans are strangely attracted to catastrophe.
I was going to say that we haven't got a Cold War anymore. They might need... It's sort of the opposite of like bread and circuses, isn't it? It's a great distraction.
I think people in the West are living in a kind of a period of hiatus, stasis, I don't know how to describe it, where you achieve a certain standard of living and you feel you've got to do more. You can't just sit there and, consume. And I think journalists are attracted to excitement. And it is extremely exciting to discover that if we do not close down, coal-fired power stations immediately, a catastrophe will happen. It's terribly attractive if you're writing. Otherwise you've got to write about, is Denis Napthine making the right decision about, reforming the on-ramp legislation for... No one wants to get excited about it. So
it's our addiction to drama.
Well, all I'm saying is that's an ingredient. It's not the determinant. There are so many entry points for people in this discussion. I found a lot of people just don't want to talk about it because they belong to a tribe, like you belong to Collingwood or you belong to the Labor Party or the Catholic Church. Your tribal identity is terribly important to you. And I sometimes think that some people would rather die than be disapproved of by their tribe. And when people are starting to be called deniers, and this is the list, it's very interesting. This sort of thing make my blood boil. If you're a denier, you're also like a tobacco lobbyist of the 60s. You're like a slave trade advocate. Slave trade. You're like a pedophile advocate. That came out of the ABC. Now, when people start doing that, you think, what's at stake here? Why are these people so outraged by this?
Yeah, but people who are saying things like that, they don't have the vested interest that we're talking about, do they? But
maybe that's why I'm bringing in this other thing, that this thing of feeling, how do you identify yourself as a moral being? One of the ways you do it is by attaching yourself to a particular group that represents your interests.
Look, I've heard people mention that this book is more like a field guide. It's just got all the good reasons, all the sound arguments. It's something that I think Bob even suggested should sit on every coffee table and every journalist's desk. So, John, I really hope people get a hold of Taxing Air. They have a good long read and they just let their thinking on this settle into some kind of sound state.
Well,
thank you very much for coming in, John.
Thanks you very much.
If you're interested and like to know a little bit more, you can find out more about Taxing Air on its own website, which is taxingair.com. It's available as an ebook and on Amazon, and I'm sure in lots of other bookshops. Thanks again, John Spooner.